Welcome back to Bible Talks on WBCM Radio.
Glad to be back.
We're continuing our journey through Genesis, and today...
Genesis 25.
Yeah, Genesis 25. We're going to dive deep into it.
Deep dive.
If you remember last time, we left off with Isaac finding his wife, Rebecca. Well, hold on to your hats.
Oh, yeah.
Because this chapter kicks things up a notch. Exploring family legacies, sibling rivalry.
It's all there.
Even the birth of nations.
This is going to be good.
It's all here in Genesis 25. So let's get started.
Let's jump in.
Okay, so what's so fascinating about this chapter is how it starts to lay the groundwork for this conflict that we're going to see throughout the entire Old Testament.
A clash between brothers, nations.
Oh, wow.
Even destinies.
Okay, so we're talking serious drama here.
Definitely.
Now, the chapter starts with Abraham's later years.
Okay.
He has another wife, Keturah.
Right.
He has several sons. But the text specifically mentions that Abraham leaves everything to Isaac.
Yes.
While his other sons receive gifts and are sent away.
Right.
What's the significance of this division?
Well, you have to remember the cultural context of inheritance back then. It wasn't just about material possessions.
Right.
It was about carrying on the family name, the lineage, and most importantly, the blessings associated with the patriarch.
Oh, well.
Abraham was chosen by God to father a nation.
Okay.
And that promise was passed down through Isaac.
So it's like a spiritual inheritance, too.
Yeah.
Not just physical stuff.
Exactly. And you can see why Abraham might be concerned about potential conflict.
Yeah.
You've got different branches of the family, each with their own claims and ambitions.
Well,
by sending his other sons away with gifts, he's trying to be fair.
Right.
But also ensuring
a clear line of success.
A clear line through Isaac.
It's like he's trying to prevent a family feud before it even starts.
Precisely. He's being strategic.
Okay.
Both for the sake of his family and for the fulfillment of God's promise.
So then Abraham dies and is buried next to Sarah.
Yes.
It feels like the closing of an era.
It really does. The text emphasizes that he lived a long life and died full of years.
Right.
There's a sense of completion and fulfillment in that statement.
And even after Abraham's death, we see God continuing to bless his lineage.
His lineage, yes.
Especially when it comes to Ishmael. Genesis 25 gives us a rundown of Ishmael's 12 sons and their territory.
12 sons.
And it specifically points out that this fulfills God's promise.
Oh, yes.
To make Ishmael a great nation.
That's a really important point.
Okay.
Remember, God made a promise to Abraham about both Isaac and Ishmael.
Right.
And here we see that promise being fulfilled.
Yeah.
Even though Ishmael wasn't the son chosen to carry the primary covenant blessing, it shows us that God is faithful to his word. It's
like a reminder that God's plans are bigger than we can imagine. He's working through multiple storylines.
Exactly.
At the same time.
Wow. And what's even more interesting is that the text mentions Ishmael's descendants living in hostility towards other tribes. It almost feels like a foreshadowing of the conflicts that will arise later in the biblical narrative.
Oh, wow. That's a great observation. It's like we're seeing the seeds of conflict being planted.
Right.
Even as God is fulfilling his promises.
There's this tension between blessing and conflict that's kind of woven throughout the story.
Oh, wow.
But before we get too ahead of ourselves, let's turn our attention to the birth of two very important figures, Jacob and Esau.
Ah, yes, the twins. This is where things get really interesting.
Definitely. It all starts with Isaac.
Okay.
He marries Rebecca when he's 40 years old, but they face years of infertility. It's only after they pray to God for a child that Rebecca finally becomes pregnant.
So we see the importance of prayer right from the start. They're desperate for a child.
Absolutely.
And they turn to God for help.
And it's a powerful reminder that God hears our prayers and responds in his own time.
Right.
But Rebecca's pregnancy isn't exactly smooth sailing, is it?
Not at all.
Nah.
The text describes these babies jostling each other inside her womb.
Yes.
Causing her a lot of distress. She even goes to inquire of the Lord, asking, why is this happening to me?
And God's answer is pretty remarkable.
Oh, wow.
He reveals to her that she's carrying two nations within her womb, and that the older will serve the younger.
Talk about unexpected twists.
Right.
This is a major departure from tradition.
It is.
Where the firstborn son usually inherits the primary blessing.
Yeah.
Whoa, that's a game changer. It's like God is already hinting that things aren't going to go as expected.
It sets the stage for the complex relationship and rivalry that will develop between Jacob and Esau.
So first, let's talk about their actual birth.
Okay,
so Esau is born first, covered in red hair.
Red hair.
Which leads to his name meaning hairy. Then comes Jacob, grasping Esau's heel.
Yeah.
Hence his name.
Which can be interpreted as he grasps the heel.
Okay.
Or even he deceives.
Wow. So even their names hint at the conflict.
They do.
And power dynamics that will play out between them.
It sure seems that way. And it doesn't take long for their personalities to clash.
Okay.
Esau becomes a skilled hunter, a rugged outdoorsman.
Okay.
While Jacob is more content staying at home.
It's a classic tale of two brothers with very different temperaments and interests.
It is.
Right.
And to complicate matters even further, their parents have their clear favorites.
Oh boy. Parental favoritism. That never ends well. And I bet a lot of our listeners can relate to that.
Absolutely.
It's a timeless source of tension and resentment within families.
You're absolutely right. We often see echoes of these ancient stories in our own lives.
Wow.
But let's get back to Jacob and Esau.
Okay.
Their sibling rivalry reaches a boiling point with the infamous birthright bargain.
Ah, yes. The bowl of stew heard round the world.
Right.
Esau comes home famished after a hunting trip.
He does.
And finds Jacob cooking up something delicious. And in a moment of weakness, driven by his hunger, Esau makes a shocking deal.
He does.
He trades his birthright to Jacob for a simple bowl of stew.
I know.
I mean, seriously,
Oh.
a bowl of stew. You'd think he'd at least hold out for a full-course meal.
It does seem a little comical at first glance, right?
Yeah.
But the implications of this exchange are huge.
Okay.
The birthright wasn't just about inheritance.
Oh.
It carried significant spiritual and leadership implications.
So Esau basically gave away his privileged position in the family line.
He did.
His connection to God's covenant promises all for a fleeting moment of satisfaction. Now, that's what I call a bad deal.
Well, it certainly raises some questions.
Okay.
Was Esau truly foolish?
Yeah.
Or was he just desperate?
Okay.
Did Jacob take advantage of his brother's weakness?
Right.
And perhaps most importantly, was this all part of God's plan?
Okay, those are some heavy questions.
Yeah.
It sounds like we need to unpack this birthright bargain.
We do.
A bit further.
Yeah.
Because there's definitely more to this story than meets the eye.
Definitely.
WBCM.
It really is a fascinating ethical dilemma, isn't it? On the one hand, you have Esau's impulsiveness and disregard for his birthright, which seem foolish and short-sighted.
I know, right? You'd think he would have treasured something so significant.
Right.
Especially considering it wasn't just about material possessions.
Right.
We were talking about a spiritual inheritance, a connection to God's covenant promises.
Exactly. It was about carrying on the legacy of Abraham and the future of the nation God had promised to create through his descendants.
Okay.
But then you have to consider Esau's emotional and physical state at that moment.
Okay.
He was famished.
Oh, yeah.
Probably dehydrated.
Yeah.
And likely exhausted after a long day of hunting.
So you're saying his physical needs kind of clouded his judgment?
I think so.
Yeah.
And led him to make a rash decision.
But couldn't you also argue that he was just plain irresponsible?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, he didn't seem to value his birthright at all.
That's a valid point.
Okay.
There's definitely an element of personal responsibility here. Esau had a choice to make.
Yeah.
And he chose to prioritize his immediate gratification over his long-term inheritance.
Right.
It's a reminder that even though we might feel pressured or desperate at times, we still have the power to choose wisely.
Okay. Well, what about Jacob? Was he being manipulative? I mean, he saw an opportunity and seized it. He even insisted on Esau swearing an oath before giving him the stew. It seems pretty calculated.
There's no doubt that Jacob was shrewd and opportunistic.
Okay.
He saw a chance to gain something he desired, and he took it.
Right.
Whether or not you view his actions as manipulative is up for interpretation.
Okay.
Some might say he was simply being resourceful,
Right.
while others might see it as taking advantage of his brother's weakness.
It's interesting how this story kind of makes us question our own motivations and actions, right? Like, when have we been tempted to prioritize our own desires over what's truly important?
It's a challenge for all of us to examine our hearts and make sure our choices align with God's will.
Right.
But there's another layer to this story that we need to consider.
You mean the whole prophecy thing? Didn't God already tell Rebekah that the older son would serve the younger?
Yes, he did.
Maybe Jacob saw this whole birthright bargain as part of God's plan unfolding?
That's where things get really complex. This story highlights the interplay of human choices and divine providence.
So do you think...
Did God orchestrate this event, or did he simply use it to advance his purposes?
Whoa, that's getting into some deep theological territory. So what are we supposed to make of all this?
Well, it's not for us to say definitively what God's intentions were.
Okay.
But this story invites us to reflect on our own choices and how they fit into God's grand narrative.
Okay.
It reminds us that even seemingly insignificant decisions can have lasting consequences.
And that God can work through our mistakes and even our flawed decisions.
Precisely. He's a God of redemption.
Yeah.
And he can use even our mess-ups for his ultimate purposes.
So listeners, what are your thoughts on this whole birthright bargain? Do you think Esau was foolish or just hungry?
Yeah, good question.
Was Jacob being manipulative or fulfilling prophecy? We'd love to hear your perspectives.
And more importantly, what can we learn from this story about our own choices and how they align with God's will?
It's definitely a story that stayed with people for centuries and continues to challenge us today.
Speaking of challenges, what are some birthrights in your own life that you might be taking for granted? It could be spiritual gifts, talents, relationships, or opportunities.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Are we valuing what truly matters, or are we trading it away for a bowl of stew, so to speak?
It's worth reflecting on for sure.
Yeah.
And remember, you can share your thoughts and insights with us in the comment section below.
Right.
We always love hearing from our listeners.
And speaking of sharing, don't forget to like and subscribe to WBCM Radio on YouTube. You can find us at www.youtube.com at Radio WWBCM.
We release new episodes every week.
Yes, we do.
Exploring different parts of the Bible and offering insights to help you deepen your faith.
We've got something for everyone, whether you're a seasoned Bible scholar
That's right.
or just starting your faith journey.
Plus, we have a fantastic selection of Christian music reviews across different genres.
We do.
So you might just discover your next favorite artist.
So make sure to check it out.
Radio WBCM.
But before we wrap up our deep dive into Genesis 25, let's take a moment to recap the key takeaways.
All right, so we started by looking at Abraham's later years and the significance of his decision to divide his inheritance, making sure that Isaac received the primary blessing and leadership role.
And then we saw how God fulfilled his promise to make Ishmael a great nation, even though he wasn't the chosen heir. But we also noticed hints of future conflict among his descendants.
We did.
And of course, we couldn't leave out the captivating story of Jacob and Esau.
Oh, definitely not.
Their contrasting personalities, their parents' favoritism, and that infamous birthright bargain.
That story really got us thinking about the complexities of human choices. Divine providence and the consequences of our actions, both big and small.
This chapter truly sets the stage for the unfolding drama and intrigue that will continue throughout the book of Genesis.
It does.
And it leaves us with lingering questions about the interplay of human free will and God's sovereign plan.
So listeners, as we move forward in our study of Genesis, keep these questions in mind. How do we see God working through unexpected choices and circumstances? And how can we make sure our own decisions align with His will for our lives?
It's amazing how these ancient stories from Genesis still resonate with us today. We've been talking about inheritance, rivalry, and destiny. And it strikes me that these themes aren't just confined to the pages of the Bible. They're woven into the very fabric of human experience.
What's fascinating is how these themes connect to our own lives even thousands of years later. We all grapple with questions of legacy,
Right.
the relationships we have with our siblings, and the choices that ultimately shape our futures.
For instance, inheritance isn't just about physical possessions or family heirlooms.
Right.
We inherit personality traits from our parents, cultural values from our communities, and even spiritual legacies from those who came before us.
It's like we're all part of this ongoing story.
Yeah.
Inheriting both blessings and burdens from the past.
And just as Isaac inherited the covenant promises made to Abraham,
Yes.
we've received an incredible spiritual inheritance.
Right, that's through Jesus Christ.
Absolutely, talking about forgiveness, grace, and the promise of eternal life.
Exactly. It's an inheritance that goes beyond anything we could ever earn or deserve.
Wow.
And speaking of powerful legacies,
Yeah.
the rivalry between Jacob and Esau also has some interesting parallels to our own experiences, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. Sibling rivalry is practically a universal experience.
It is.
Whether it's competing for attention resources or even just trying to win our parents' approval, we see those same dynamics playing out between Jacob and Esau.
Right.
And it definitely leads to some dramatic consequences.
It makes you wonder if some degree of rivalry is just a natural part of family dynamics.
Right.
But then there's that added element of destiny. The fact that God revealed to Rebekah that the older son would serve the younger,
Right.
it challenges our assumptions about how things should be, about who deserves what.
It's like God is turning the script upside down,
He is.
showing us that his ways are not always our ways.
Exactly. And it raises a really important question.
Okay.
How much control do we actually have over our own lives?
That's a good one.
Are our paths predetermined?
Right.
Or do we have the freedom to choose our own destiny?
Those are some big questions. It
But
seems
why-
like philosophers and theologians have been wrestling with those ideas for centuries.
They have. And while Genesis 25 doesn't necessarily provide all the answers, it does offer us a glimpse into the mysterious interplay between human choices and divine sovereignty.
Okay.
God has a plan, but we also have the ability to make decisions that shape our lives.
So listeners, as we wrap up our deep dive into Genesis 25, I want to leave you with a few thought-provoking questions. How are the themes of inheritance, rivalry, and destiny playing out in your own life?
Yeah.
What legacies have you inherited, both good and bad? Are there any relationships that might need healing, especially with siblings or family members?
Good question.
And perhaps most importantly, are you open to God's guidance, even when it leads you down unexpected paths?
Remember, God's plans are often bigger and more mysterious than our own limited perspectives.
Yeah.
He might be using the seemingly random events in your life to accomplish something amazing.
Wow.
So be open to the possibilities, lean into His grace, and trust in His goodness.
And as always, we encourage you to share your thoughts and insights with us in the comments.
Yeah.
We'd love to hear your perspectives on this incredible chapter of Genesis.
And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to WBCM Radio on YouTube for more deep dives into the Bible.
Thanks for joining us today on Bible Talks. We'll be back next week to explore more of the fascinating stories and timeless truths found in the book of Genesis. Until then, may you find peace, guidance, and a deeper understanding of God's Word.